Hey guys, sorry about that. I had to go to a meeting. It was actually with the Student Leadership Council, and they are planning a virtual Spirit Week. So make sure you check in about that information. So that will be on Etsy, so it should be some fun. All right, back to the digestive system. So let me just kind of go over again what I was talking about. So the digestive system is one very long track that the food will pass through, and it passes through that long tube in order to be broken down from large particles into molecule-sized particles that can leave the digestive tract, enter the blood, and then once those useful molecules are in the blood, they can be transported throughout the body to the cells where they're needed. So we start in the mouth or the oral cavity where both chemical and physical digestion take place. Then as soon as the food is chewed up and it's mixed with saliva, it becomes a bolus. The bolus passes through our throat area known as the pharynx. It then travels through the esophagus, through peristalsis, and then it enters into the stomach where it continues to be digested both chemically and physically. And recall that I said that there are enzymes, which are special chemicals that break the food down chemically, or what is now called the bolus, down chemically. And there's also acid within the stomach that helps with that breakdown also. Once the material that is now broken down, that food or nutrient material that is broken down, now enters into the small intestine. And at this time, it is now called chyme. And in the small intestine, in the very first part of the small intestine, there's still some digestion that occurs. Okay? Then, once all of that digestion is done, the next really important thing that happens in the small intestine is called absorption. And what this means is the food particles that are now molecular size, those little nutrient molecules, are going to be absorbed into the blood. So they are going to leave the small intestine and enter into the blood. And the way that that happens is the small intestine is lined with these little finger-like projections. And all of these little finger-like projections are lined with single cells, because digestion of the molecules can only happen through the process known as diffusion. And diffusion can only occur through single cells membranes, the membranes of single cells. That makes sense? So what happens is these finger-like protrusions called villi increase the surface area. So look, if my hand was just straight, if it's flat, there's not a lot of surface, right? But if I now break it into all these fingers, look, I have all this surface on all of these areas. So diffusion can now happen along all of these areas so that all of our body can get all of the nutrients that it needs, because there's all of this area for diffusion of these nutrients to take place. That's really, really important. So those are called the villi of the small intestine. And again, that is where absorption takes place. So all the good stuff, all those good broken down molecules, so things like carbohydrate, which is glucose, protein, amino acids, and parts of fats that are called glyceride and glycerol and fatty acids. Those are all going to go into the blood and be carried off where they're needed. Whatever is left over is going to remain in the small intestine and then travel to the large intestine. And this is the large intestine. So the small intestine actually ends here, and the large intestine begins, and we have an ascending, a transverse, and a descending large intestine. And what happens in the large intestine is water that is within our body is reabsorbed, it's called. So what that means is any water that is still within our digestive system gets pulled back into the body because our body is made up mostly of water and needs to hold on to that water so we don't get dehydrated, because all of the activity of our cells have to happen in that nice watery medium. Okay, so water gets pulled back into the system. So what's being created is really the feces, just the waste, right? So a little fun fact again, if you have diarrhea, that's because something is wrong with your large intestine. It could be due to, again, some sort of bacteria or infection, which is not allowing that water to go back into or be reabsorbed into your body. And so what ends up happening is that water is expelled with the rest of your waste. And so that's why diarrhea is very liquidy, it's fluid. And having diarrhea can actually, if it's chronic, if it's really, really bad, it can actually lead to death if it goes on too long, because what's happening is your body is becoming dehydrated because that fluid that was supposed to be pulled back into your body is now being excreted. So we don't want that to happen. So when you get sick, when you're sick to your stomach or when you have diarrhea, you are told, to make sure that you're keeping your body hydrated by drinking lots and lots of water. Okay. All right. But on a normal day when you don't have diarrhea, what ends up happening is the waste material, the feces, comes to this area of the large intestine, which is called your rectum. And that is like a storage area. And then when that rectum is full, that sends a signal to your brain saying, I have to go to the bathroom. And then your anus will open. It's a sphincter, which is like a round kind of muscle. And as the muscle opens, that releases the feces from your body. And that muscle is known as the anus. I think I just said that. Okay, so another thing I'm looking at, unfortunately, my camera, it makes things, the mirror image, which is frustrating because when I write something, I have to write it backwards if I'm going to show it to you. And I'm noticing right now that this is also backwards. But the reason I know it's backward is because here I see this little projection coming off of the large intestine. Do you see it? It looks like a little finger projection. That is your appendix. Now your appendix is really on the, if I hold this the right way, that would be I have to think about this for a minute. This is in my body now. So the appendix is on the right-hand side of your body. So I guess that's kind of right. Anyway, it is your appendix, it actually has no purpose. It's believed that in lower animals, lower mammals, they have an appendix because it would help to break down their diet, their high fiber diet, things like, bunny rabbits and cows. They have much larger, and rats, they have much larger appendix because they break down that type of diet. As humans, we eat more of a variety and don't eat like the amount of seeds and grains to sustain ourselves because we're also carnivores. We eat both. We're actually omnivores. Anyway, our appendix no longer really has a function. But what can happen is because of the location of it, sometimes bacteria can get trapped in there. And when the bacteria are trapped in there, they reproduce, and they also give off their waste materials because they're living organisms. So they produce waste. And as they produce waste, the appendix blows up inside. That waste is toxic. So if the appendix keeps expanding and actually blows up, it can be deadly because all of that deadly toxin waste that the bacteria has produced is now floating around the inside of the body, and it can cause organ shutdown. So that's why when you have those like severe pains in your right-hand side of your body and your lower abdomen, it's really important to have that checked out because you don't want to, have your appendix burst. All right. So I think that's everything about the digestive system. Oh, no, it's not. I've totally forgot the accessory organs, and then I'll be done. Sorry, just a couple more minutes. So basically what we've gone through is the GI tract, or the GI tube, again, starting at the mouth and ending with the anus. And we've gone over what happens in those different parts as the bolus and then the chyme make their way through the digestive system. There are 3 other organs that are part of the digestive system, but the food never enters these. They are called the accessory organ. The first one I've outlined in red here, that is a very big organ known as the liver. The liver has many functions in the body, but the function that pertains to the digestive system is it makes a substance called bile. And bile breaks down fat. So it's a special chemical that breaks down fat. And underneath the liver is like a little kind of balloon-like structure. I've colored it in black here. That's called the gallbladder. The gallbladder is the organ that stores the bile. Okay, so it stores bile, and then when we eat fatty food, there's a little tube that goes from the gallbladder into the first part of the small intestine, and so it injects the bile into that area of the small intestine when we eat fatty food so that fat can be broken down. Okay? Sometimes you can get something that's called gallstones in your gallbladder where the bile creates like little salt kind of actual stones, and they can be really painful because they can't pass, and sometimes people will have to get their gallbladder removed. Now, their body can still produce the bile, and then that bile can still go to the small intestine, but not in the same manner that it does when it's within the gallbladder. What happens if you have your gallbladder removed is you have to really try not to eat as many fatty foods. Fun fact. And then finally, the third accessory organ of the digestive system, and I've colored it in blue, it's kind of in behind the stomach there, that is called the pancreas. And again, the pancreas has different functions in the body, but the function that has to do with digestion is it makes enzymes. And again, enzymes are special chemicals that help to break down the food into new molecules that are able to be absorbed later in the small intestine. Okay? So now I am done with the digestive system, and sorry I had to do it in 2 parts because of that meeting, but hopefully this makes sense. And I know sometimes it's hard to, watch a person when they're just talking at you the whole time, but please watch and try and listen. And if it's too much, just take a little break and then come back and listen to the rest of it. Okay? So coming up soon, you will next be learning about the respiratory system. So stay tuned for that, and I hope you're doing really well, and keep that mind active, keep learning, and I really hope to hear from you soon. Take care. Bye now.